For many of us in the global south, there's a lot of trauma everywhere, and even intergenerational trauma from colonization. And one of the way that it manifests is in our difficulty asserting healthy boundaries. And this is, I think, made even more complex by the way our cultures are often described as being more open, receptive, warm, friendly in comparison to our colonizers. But openness without boundaries also often leaves us vulnerable to further extraction and abuse. So I would love to hear from your perspective. How have you navigated the practice of setting boundaries, and what can help us skill up in this?
Yeah, for me, growing up, I I understood boundaries because I was a mixed child in a predominantly different ethnic group. So I received a lot of racism growing up as a kid. So I understood boundaries like very early on because like just can't let that get to you, basically. Of course, in my case, it was a little bit, I would say, atypical because my parents didn't help. They didn't support me with that. They put me in situations where I would actually experience racism, etc. So I became very aware that even the people who are supposed to protect you do not respect your boundaries or, in fact, your health, let alone their own health. Like they are not looking at, reasons why they might treat a child this way, let alone their child, etc. A lot of those things. So for me, like I experience boundaries because I experience abuse, in the sense of what happens when I don't set boundaries. And I became very, I would say, shaped by that experience. I mean, as all children do, you are especially shaped by the trauma that you experience as a kid, etc. So in my case, I experienced not only like this kind of racism or cultural abuse, which was very normal at that time at the place where I was born, but also like I was abused physically, and psychologically. And then, we haven't even come to talk about like the colonial harms of ethnocide and epistemicide yet. But when I was a kid, I felt this like very strongly. I didn't know what I was feeling, but I definitely felt that. So I understood boundaries from this perspective in terms of like I'm being harmed, and I understand that I'm being harmed, and I need to do something to put a stop to it, or at least to insulate myself from it, etc. So that's where I started understanding the need for boundaries and what could happen basically if I didn't do enough for myself. I ended up growing up very suicidal anyway, so I'm not sure how well like the boundaries help. But again, like I didn't have like mentorship from anyone. I didn't know why these things were happening to me. I didn't have access to spaces that could help me process that. So, and I understand obviously like a lot of people in the global south are in that situation as well, where lack of access to help, basically, lack of access to, firstly, like justice, let alone actually like helping you to manage your mental health, etc., or teaching you how to set boundaries or like encouraging you to do those things. So I would say like this is how a lot of us come to understand why we need boundaries, which is kind of the point when it's too late, right? And I would say like the most important reason for scaling up is because you care about, other people that you can see who are being abused and, used and abused because they don't have good boundaries. And the reality is that our societies, especially here in Asia, because of colonization and a whole bunch of other things, we tend to be very kind of obedient. And that means that, anything that you want to do for yourself is immediately kind of like selfish, and you're not taking into consideration like other people's needs, etc., which also ties into this whole like filial piety thing, which is like, everything that your parents say is like the word from God and you have to like follow it, blah blah blah. So setting boundaries in that context can be extremely nerve-wracking. But I think this is also a conversation between um parents and children and in relation to the specific culture that they sit within. Because not every culture sees boundaries in the same way, obviously, as Western culture. And I think there's also context around like trauma and abuse and respect within the family and the ways that they are trying to seek health in line with their traditional practices of their own culture. So I would never kind of like advocate for a certain way to set boundaries or like, here's how you can do it, step one, two, three, because I think it's very contextual. And at the same time, I think, it's about the experience of harm and how that harm turns into trauma and when, what's your red lines for when like boundaries really need to be set, etc. So in some cases, it's basically something that's cultural and the culture processes that harm in a different way. So it might cause that harm, but it might also process that harm and help it turn into something else. And it's part of kind of the way that people are indoctrinated into that culture. But in other cases, especially when we're talking about colonized cultures, when that harm turns into extraction, that's where there's, I would say, a big problem when that becomes unhealthy. And for me, like that would be that moment where, okay, boundaries are necessary and you need to kind of like find ways to figure out a strategy to implement boundaries that actually work for you in that space.
Yeah, I love what you said. Yeah, for me, this experience of setting boundaries, as you said, came too late, precisely because of what you said about experiencing how here in the Global South, health and systems of support are so luxury items almost. You are not prepared to deal with these things, and there is this culture of, as you said, pleasing others and be obedient, and we are not taught about boundaries at all as children. And I think that for me shaped a lot how I experienced as a child power dynamics and trauma and abuse, because I had zero skills in setting boundaries. And I think that happened in early childhood, going to school, and I was really an introverted child. I didn't want to interact with other children and was often kind of nudged to behave in ways that what are expected for a more extroverted child to behave. So when I was like 5, 6, I experienced a lot of bullying in school. And I think the way back then, for me to speak out scared me a lot more than the perspective of continuing suffering abuses. So for a long time, I had no boundaries at all. I just accepted. And I think because it happened so early on, it kind of shaped this kind of compliance and the perspective and this internalization of power dynamics and, just the way things are. And some people are up in the social hierarchies while others are meant to just accept whatever treatment came their way. And I think this kind of started to shift gradually as this abuse increased, instead of, as being addressed head on to avoid this also shaping perspectives. Because I think when it happens so early, it's kind of, you don't have the basis formed as an individual. Like for a long while, I thought, this is just my personality. When
Especially
no, it
when I
was
think people tell you that it's okay, and then people don't ask you if there's something wrong. And also they make it sound as though it's normal. Like, no, but kids are, you should go and play. Like kids do that, and you should do this, and you should do that, and you should kind of like almost making you fit into like, you need to be happy in this way that I tell you that you're supposed to be happy.
exactly. Yeah, there is no cultivation of individuality as children behaving in ways that fit them. Like I just wanted to be alone and play alone. And I think I was only able to shift that perspective and realize that no, it's not the way things are. It's like this is a reality that is constructed and the system is constructed, so therefore it can be challenged. It's not like there's one objective reality and this is it. And you know, and I think I was only able to realize that when the bullshit increased to a level that I was like, okay, this makes zero sense. If I continue to feed this, it's not only going to continue, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So I need to do something. And started taking these steps for myself that then I think setting boundaries for yourself then allows you to, as you said, see these systems of oppression around you and being able to act on it. Because if you are not able to do that even for yourself, how you're going to do that for others and act in ways that are healthy? So I think there's something really important. Setting boundaries is so important and have that clarity. And while I know that in the global north, maybe the relationship to boundaries is different from what I see from the outside. Like I think that is much more easy or comes more naturally than for our cultures. And I do think that this has a lot to do with colonization and the effects of abuse, intergenerational trauma and all of that. Yeah, so I think boundaries is so necessary for health in general.
It's the foundation of health. Like boundaries is how you know like what's healthy and what's not, and communicating that, right?
Exactly.